Are you there? Can you hear me? Gotta unmute yourself. It's supposed to be behind the deer so the horns look bigger, not in front of it.
True. Like I'm
Can't hear very well.
Are you at home in a shop or are you in the house now?
I'm at home.
How's everything going down in PEC?
Do you guys have the wind blowing? It's just howling out here.
Yeah, it's blowing really bad. That isn't it. Can you hear me or no?
You're very much in and out.
Do you need me to run up to the school?
Normally it's okay. Depends on how vocal you want to be.
I'll just keep my trap shut and maybe it won't be a problem.
We can just have you repeat yourself real often. Did you see that packet of DPI stuff I sent your way?
And just looking at it, I just pulled it up here when I got on again. So looks like some good stuff.
I did a real quick read of 17 pages, so.
Oh boy, I just finished a book last night. I'll have to finish this again tonight now.
Did you like The Kite Runner?
I did. It was. I thought it had a. It wasn't a happy ending book per se, as you probably know, but it was definitely a worthwhile read.
Yeah. Really good at getting a good sense of how people live in another part of the world, that's for sure.
Yeah, so, and you talk about the 80s and 90s, and I think, oh, I remember this happening. I remember this happening, and then, boy, the United States compared to Afghanistan, night and day difference.
Mike wasn't planning on coming up to school, was he?
I'm on.
Oh, there you are. Okay, good. I'm hoping Mike 8 isn't reading this material too closely that I just sent out. Because the CDC doesn't have any extracurricular activities actually through phase 1, 2, or 3, but certainly not in phase 1 and 2.
That hurts. That hurts. Are they still thinking September before we hit phase 1?
Well, this material is CDC stuff that's sent to the White House as a draft. And so that's one level, but Wisconsin will be at a different level. So I don't, and they're going to be using that as a guide to develop their guidance that we'll get later. But the CDC guidance doesn't recommend opening schools until phase 1, but I don't know what until phase 2, but I don't know what their definition of phase 1 and phase 2 are either, so.
If you had a 50% capacity, I don't see how that is going to work as far as being in school.
Yeah. And they recommend social distancing on the school bus, which will be interesting to do too.
Run route, everybody up or dial up back in another route, go back in another route.
Sorry, I had myself on mute there, and I think my video was off. I was listening to you guys the whole time, but you didn't see me or hear me. So I am here.
Todd. Okay, Todd, good.
Is everybody here that we're expecting or waiting on?
Yep.
Okay. Well, it is just past 5:30, so I will call the meeting of the Finance Committee to order. First thing on the agenda is roll call. So Dreschmeyer,
Here.
Esther,
Here.
and Mitchik is here. And looks like we have Mr. Bird on as well. Great, welcome.
Here, hi. Doing.
Next thing is certification of meeting notice.
So moved. I'll second that.
Okay. And the first item on here is fiscal year 20 expenditure and revenue update.
Are you ready for me to go, Todd?
Yep, you can go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I'd like to just start with a couple updates on the think piece that I'd shared earlier this week. There might be a couple updates there for you. Just in terms of the general closure information, no new information from Wisconsin, at least as of yet. If they stick with the 14-day, trajectory, we, I think, got as high as 2 days one time and then got another, bubble. So we're not there yet. And of course, we don't, in Wisconsin, won't hit phase 1 then until we meet some preliminary criteria. So I don't have any new information. The last information we had was to think late summer, early fall before we'd even start in phase 1. So that's helped direct a little bit of our planning. The good news for me out of that, though, is that the state is going to be putting together a planning team and trying to provide some more guidance to schools. I think we all agreed that we went into this spring in very much a triage mode. Everybody trying to do the best they could in every way they could. And then every school district was behaving very differently. So I think as a state, there's some hope that we'll try to do, have at least some continuity across district if we do end up not being able to open for sure. But even if we do open, what does that mean for health guidelines for kids, social distancing, so that we're all at least coming up with some common language and common definitions. So I think that will be important. And some of the biggest roadblocks, of course, will be the testing, whether that's happening. The PPE, Iowa County right now does not have enough, would not have enough, and we'll see where that takes us. So I think we have to be prepared for continued delays in spite of, but there's a lot of time between now and the fall, but we have a lot of criteria we'd have to meet. So nothing really new on the closing. The adjustments to the finances at the state, that's going to be a big thing to be watching. I shared with you a little bit about what those are. No new information there. We are in a shortfall. It does sound like, though, more positive that there may be some federal money coming to states to backfill some of that decline, but a lot of it depends on how long the revenue decline lasts for the state. But I'm guessing that there will be some impact on probably a repair bill, and then probably some impact on the next year, the next biennium as well. I laid out a few things. Again, nothing that's really changed in sort of some of the, the planning, and we can talk about that when we get into things going forward. But in summer school, actually, I feel good about that. We are hoping Our target is to gain at least half of the normal kids that we would have, or minutes and hours that we would have for summer school. The plan that we worked out with Southwest Tech is going to give us the biggest bang for the buck in terms of minutes that we could garner. So if we can get some kids to take some of those classes, that's a half of an FTE for every successfully completed Southwest Tech class. So that really could be positive. And we do have teachers that are interested in doing some other things, and we'll look at that. But I'm much more optimistic rather than just walking away from those 10, 11 students. I'm thinking we have a good shot at getting at least half of that, which of course would help in the revenue cap over that 3-year average, but would really help in terms of the state aid. Food services, we were up to 108 meals this week, which was really good. I said in the memo, we won't be able to do this past May. We got some word this week, well, maybe we'll be able to do it to June 30th. What came out tonight looks like we're not gonna be able to do it past May. So we'll wait and see what happens. But we were actually getting, in terms of reimbursement for those meals, cents for every breakfast and $3.48 for every lunch. So for every one of those meals, it was 68. So we were, in terms of reimbursement, this emergency reimbursement far exceeded what we would have gotten normally. So having that has been a positive piece for our food service. So instead of having to maybe transfer more, we were thinking of transferring 20,000 anyway. We're guessing right now it might be like 21,000. So it's not going to have much of an impact at all, even though we didn't have any, April and May revenue from the kids. So that's good news on that one as well. The special education pieces that I talked about in the memo, we did get information released from the Department of Education this week where they are not going to be considering any waivers on special education related to free and appropriate education or least restrictive environment. Their message is that you should be able to meet all of their IEP kids' needs through the virtual environment or other creative means. I'm not quite sure how that works, if it's an OT or a PT or a speech and language. So the message is that for those services that we haven't been able to provide, that the resolution of that will most likely be some compensatory services. If we get to the point where we can have a few kids in the building with a teacher under that 10 per person model, sometime after, if the Safer at Home waiver ends June 30th and allows us to use the school building, we would probably start doing some of those compensatory services already yet this summer, but we don't know if that's going to be a possibility yet or not. So somewhere along the line, if kids haven't been able to get what their IEP has called for, we're going to have to find a way to make some of that happen. So that wasn't helpful, that there won't be any flexibility around those two pieces, but we'll make that work. So I think the others will probably be able to talk as we go through the meeting items, but were there any other thoughts or comments or questions about just sort of that general state of affairs that I shared out with everybody? Okay, super. Then let's go under the fiscal year 20 expenditures and revenues. And is that big enough for everybody to see, or do you have your own copy?
I have my own copy.
Okay, all righty.
We're good.
I can see it.
Okay.
You're fine.
Okay, well, just to start, feel good about what we've already purchased. And you've gotten the lawnmower and the Genie Lift, the stage lighting, that HVAC controller that we had to replace, and then also the weight room lights. We had to purchase some additional lights because the LED ones that we had didn't work in those fixtures. So all of those things are already taken care of, either purchased and on site or whatever. So that's good. I point to the additional expenditure or the unencumbered funds that we have right now. I'm looking at, as of this afternoon, 106, 380, 378. That's in our budget that we will have some flexibility on. There will still be some things that are going to be coming out of there that I have missed. I've tried to reserve money for everything that I can think of, but that number is going to change a little bit. It'll come down a little bit, but it's fairly good for right now. But if you add to that budget balance, the fact that we have more revenue coming in than what we had in the budget, and that's going to go up. We have the Genie lift on the website. The surplus store is putting that out there. It's already up to $835. So that will be adding to that piece. Their HRA fund, I'm guessing right now that we will have $25,000 that will go unspent on what our commitment is to the staff's high-end deductible portion there. And that could easily be another $2,000 to $4,000 higher. I'm holding in reserve $5,500 for both May and June, and we've only had 2 months out of the 12 or so. So I think that could go higher. Transportation, I've asterisked there for you. The $8,000 savings was if we were going to be paying for the transportation routes as had been requested. But since we've gotten word from Warco that they did qualify for the PPP loan, that's good news because they're getting some compensation for that piece. So my guess is that we would be not spending, at least not the whole amount to the routes yet. And so that I put down here what the total balance is for the transportation is $37,000. And I've only booked as a potential money to spend as $8,000. So that, almost another $30,000 that could be there. Summer school right now, and we'll take a look at that. I'm guessing that we probably will only spend about half of what we have budgeted, though that could change. And if it changes, that's good because it just means we'll have more kids taking classes or more courses that we can offer through our summer school program. And then the Odyssey of the Mind piece. I think utilities, we're going to be underspending to a certain degree there too, because we kept the building, obviously at a lower, we haven't been heating or air conditioning as much, or we won't be. So that still leaves a nice balance of stuff to be taking a look at. And that still assumes, I think I've got like 40,000 that I have in reserve for the supplies, paper, software licenses, things like that I know we can try to prepay. So we've got a lot to work with there, which is again the good side of things. Then over on the left, you have those expenses that we've been talking about. What are some good projects for us to be working on? And then even with all of those, and we're not going to do necessarily all of those, that still leaves about 73,000 that I have as, unencumbered at this point. And that gets down to, okay, what do we do with that? And your decision then being, what do we spend this year that's a legitimate, valuable expenditure? Are there some of those things that we'd like to do but we can't get done, but then we'll just put that in fund balance for next year and spend it next year? Or do we put that in Fund 46? So those would seem to be your best three options. So the next item is to actually take a look at the projects. So let's just kind of walk through that list there. The pre-ordering of the salt that we use for the winter time, we've done that now like the last 2 or 3 years. So we'll just expend that again. The bleacher ADA steps, Buildings and Grounds is going to look at that next week. We've got 3 different bids in on that, so you can see the range of the bids from almost just under 9,000 to just over 15,000. So the Buildings and Grounds will have a recommendation on that, though I think investing on those steps is, but which proposal Buildings and Grounds will have a recommendation on. The backstop safety steps, we've got 2 bids of the safety straps. We have 2 bids on that. It expanded a little bit because the one person came in and recommended some cables that really should be replaced too. So I think it was 1,000, just under 2,000, the original bid. But we asked them both to bid on what we think we needed to get fixed. And so those are the 2 bids that we have. The technology we'll talk about, but we're ready to spend that 30,000. The elementary paving, and that's really not paving. Mike reminded me, it's heat patch and seal coat. So I did correct that on one other item, but that's the bid we have for that. And Buildings and Grounds has already approved that. The LED lighting, Buildings and Grounds is okay with, and the tuck pointing bid came in. I don't think we had that for the last Buildings and Grounds, but that's the bid for that, right on sort of what we were guessing. The dedicated power line to make sure that our computer system can have its own, can be connected directly to the generator so we don't lose those services if the power goes out. The ticket booth is sort of incidental stuff. And then the ADA paving, that 14,385 isn't for the ticket booth, that's for sure. Those should be down one, I'm sorry. That whole row should be down just one more. So the ADA paving is from 10,780 to 14,385, and we've got a couple bids on that. We looked at the gym curtain, but that was $14,700 to fix it, to replace it, which we've sort of put in the no column. The concession stand was $8,400 just to raise it, nothing to do with power, electricity, or fixing anything. So that sounded like too massive a project for this moment in time. So we've said no to that. And then the caulking of the windows, we don't have a price yet on that one. And but we have asked a local person about that because that was one of the things that Mike or Tom had recommended. So we hope to have that for Buildings and Grounds later. The Eye in the Sky is connected to the huddle services that we have for all of the extracurricular activities that are going on. And this would allow, Josh, it's posted in the gym or outside so you can get the aerial view. And then I think also if we would, for example, play games but not be able to have a crowd, or in the gym if we played games but couldn't have a lot of people, it would allow us to, have pictures from a more global picture. Josh, do you want to address that at all?
Yeah, basically, you might be familiar with the Eye in the Sky previously, but this one is through Huddle, and it's a lot more advanced. And it's for the camera, and then you still put your fees. Like each sport has a fee for your stats and all that goes with it. But you can use that for anything, as Ms. Henderson said. We can take our concerts. We can technically it goes on a mount on the wall, so you can take it down. They don't recommend doing that though. But I was talking to Brad about it, and he said he wouldn't have a problem moving that. For example, if we want to move it to the elementary gym and use it for our concerts as well, depending on. Well, even if we do have people that are able to come in, so we can live stream it, and such like that. So just something that we thought of here recently. If, for example, we cannot get the fans or playing without fans, or even if we were, how we can film those games for people to watch.
Josh, is that for one unit?
That's for one unit, yes.
Okay.
And Brad, we'll discuss this more at Buildings and Grounds too, because Brad was getting some additional questions answered. But just found out today too, that's an annual fee because you're really leasing that equipment. You're not buying a camera that we would have. We're leasing that camera capability on an annual basis. So the huddle is $5,000 and the camera is $8,000. So that would be collectively then, I'm sorry, $3,000. Collectively it would be an $8,000 package for the huddle. And right now the booster clubs, whoever the various booster clubs and activity groups pay the $5,000 for the huddle service, but the $3,000, I I'm guessing would probably end up being an ongoing district cost unless we can recruit some other pieces. So, but that's something we hadn't had a chance to talk about, but think about that. Buildings and grounds would be a good chance to sort of talk some more about what that can do and how that works. So Brad was going to get back with some additional questions on that one, but but that kind of gives you a little bit of a big picture in terms of where we're at. That still leaves, and again, there can be some things that could maybe pare down that $73,000. A lot of that depends on how much we can prepay. I was really nervous about the technology, but we just, the Chromebooks we'll be able to get, the smart boards we'll talk about, we would be able to get the server that we want to be getting. A lot of those things we'll be able to get here in June. And that was one that was making me nervous because I know everybody's trying to get their hands on, you know, Chromebooks and different things right now. But that was sort of good news. The trickier one may be the bleachers in terms of whether or not they could get parts to do that stairwell in time. So that one, the ADA walkway and the paving, those things, they know they've got their deadline. So they've said that they could get that done by June. I didn't mean to overlook the new bleachers either. We do have costs on that we'll share with Buildings and Grounds, but those are well over $100,000 for that piece of it. But that's, you know, that's something we'll put together a folder of pictures and specifications, and you'll be able to take a look at that. But I didn't include that at this point because it looked like the just putting the safety steps in the bleachers might be a more value at this point in time. So, but that's always something to think about as well. Josh had also asked HTF about just blending the colors between the commons and the hallway and whatnot. And just because we're still looking at how we smooth all of that together, and to do all of it with the flakes, they wanted $18,000, almost $19,000. So that's in our no column, but we did ask. So that was kind of where we're at. Thoughts, questions on that as a piece?
I don't have anything.
Okay.
I don't know.
Let me go back to end of year technology. Everybody keeps telling me this gets easier after a while, but I'm not finding that necessarily the case. I'm looking for the technology piece. There you go, right in front of me. So this is what we were looking, this is what we were looking at because we do have money in our local budget. So the Chromebooks and the security camera, we are looking at taking out of the money that we have in our regular budget plan for technology. These Chromebooks, the 50 would be the computers for the freshman incoming class. So they all would have a Chromebook that they would have with them for the next 4 years. And the 30 beyond what we need for the freshmen are the number of Chromebooks that we sent out into the community during the break. And we fully expect that a lot of them will come back and be usable in some fashion, but that was the number that we used so that if they take some repair or if they're better off as standby computers or whatever, we wanted to make sure we had a fully utilized set to replace the 30 that went out if we were running into difficulties with them. And we have to do a classroom set almost every once in a while anyway. Then the end of the year budget, I had targeted an additional $30,000 for technology purposes. There's one of Brad's servers needs to be replaced. We want to get our new administrator coming in, set up with a computer. We also then looked at, we had a couple smart boards that we know we needed to be replacing. And we experimented with a different style last year at really bargain prices, and they've worked, but we aren't as happy with them as we are with the Tyranny product, again, the smart product. And these smart boards are ones that they've gone away from the projector. So it's all in the LED screen on the, on the wall. So you don't have to do the projector anymore. And then of course, every upgrade has a little more interactivity and some of the smart tools, licensing and whatnot. So I think in many respects, they would be good tools, especially if we continue in a distance learning kind of environment, or if we'd have to have a split classroom, you get between two rooms or something like that. But anyway, there are 2 models that are there. We can get a discounted rate on 1 copy of each model. So we'll do that. But then we're recommending that we get another 6. Right now we're looking at 3 teachers in the high school and then 5 in the middle school. Though that could be rethought. A couple in the middle school have to be replaced, but we may end, rather than the whole middle school, maybe we'd experiment with some in the upper elementary, depending on where they're at. We could do 3, 4, and 5, for example, if that were the case. But they're $2,700 a piece. And we are in that cycle where, we have to start replacing them. This year seemed like a good time to maybe get a jump start on that. But we probably would be coming back and wanting to try to get on a cycle where every year we got at least 3 of them, until the older models that we got quite a few years ago are now replaced then with these newer models. So if you were looking for additional ways to spend some dollars, we could certainly go beyond the 8, but the 8 is what we'd really like to get at this point in time, and knowing that they could certainly be used elsewhere if you wanted to go with more of them. And then we also want to replace 10 of the iPads. We've got about 10 that are out, but also there are several of them that are becoming dated, so they're not as effective with the iReady program any longer. They've just gotten dated. So some of that may come out of, we might be able to put about half of that into the Common School Fund, because we host those in the library and they're checked out. So we just received another $3,500, $700 in Common School funds as one of the boosts this year. So half of that may indeed come out of library funds if we don't find other Common School Fund needs. So we might not even expend all of that in that category. We have one other piece that we know we're going to be getting, but we can get it through E-rate. So we're putting that on next year, and that will be a purchase, but then also an E-rate reimbursement then coming next year. But that's sort of where we're at with the technology. Questions on that part of it?
Nancy, what is the age of the the smart displays that we currently are trying to replace?
Well, the middle school ones would have been the first wave, the very first charter school grant, which goes back how many years now?
10 years already?
Yeah.
Okay.
And like I say, it's Miss Tess's one that we and she uses it every day. And that's the one that we definitely want, that has to change. But there's a lot of use in the middle school. Spanish, math, science use it a lot at the high school. But there again, it would give us some flexibility. But right now, our plan would be to start replacing the middle school ones, because they would be the oldest ones. And then the high school and the elementary came after that. But they're older. And we did have to replace a couple of the projectors. We've been sort of doing that. But last year we tried to go with the other, a different, not a Tyranny smart board, but a smart board like piece of equipment that didn't have the projector. And like you say, it worked, but it still wasn't quite as good as the Tyranny product. So we have to go back to that. But But that can be a gradual kind of piece then as well, so. Kind of moving on down, just down through the list then. I told you I'd come back with some recommendation about essential employee types of things. Settled on, let's see, I don't need that one. I'm going to stop sharing for a while. I settled when we were talking about the essential the 5 people that are here year round all of the time that didn't get any kind of time off during this whole piece. Is settled on the recommendation that they have the opportunity to take more of their vacation days than what that some of them have in their contract as per diem pay. Because they haven't been able to take their vacation time, and I don't. So when I look ahead at May and then June, I'm not sure that's some may be able to, but it's not looking like a better time necessarily either. So that seemed to be a fair way to try to recognize the fact that, well, when some people were having that paid administrative leave, these folks were there, and because they were working at our request, they might not have access to get their vacation time in. So it seemed to be fair to allow them to access that. So that was the recommendation. And then I also, I struggle always with how to address my time, but I did it for you, just laid it out. And like I say, it's not going to change anything, but it just gave you some thoughts of some things that you could consider. So I'll just leave it at that. If you have questions, let me know.
So Nancy, my only question on the package that you kind of had laid out for yourself is the dental insurance was additional 5 years. So that would be something that we would be encumbered with into the future. I guess that would be my only concern is I realize how payments in the future help you out as far as taxes and things like that go. But from our standpoint with the extra money this year, it would be nice just to pay you out what needs to be a supplemental contract for this year and be done with it.
Well, and I totally understand that too. And that's fine also. So that isn't something that you need to worry about as an encumbrance going forward. So. And if you would prefer, just that's something you guys can have a conversation with later. I can take off and you guys can just, visit about that if you would prefer doing it that way. And because again, we'll be looking at making recommendations for the board later. So I can just leave you at it later if you feel more comfortable about that.
Yes, Nancy, I'm kind of with Mike on the situation. If we obviously, your contract's your contract and you've been working beyond your contract, which I have no problem with paying out the additional days. So my thought would be to pay out what you are in this fiscal year, and then whatever we have, I don't want to see it be something down the road for additional years if we don't have to. So
that makes sense. That's fine with me too. And what that amount is totally in your hands as well, because that's not, that's not something that, like I say, that's just not for me to say. How about if we move on and you guys, like I say, you guys can have a discussion at whatever time makes sense to you for that one. Okay, I'll just I'll let that one go for a second. The safety grant, I just wanted to let you know, we have about $7,200 left in round 2 of the safety grant. The bulk of that was going to go for professional development and training. And we had plans, people were going to be up in, for 4 or 5 folks for 2 days in hotel rooms and all that sort of stuff. Obviously, all of that's canceled, and most of the training is going to be virtual now. So I don't want to walk away from that money if we can. So I'm going to do a budget amendment. If we can get those cameras that I had in the technology and the safety grant, that's great. That's just that much more that we have to do something else with. But it would be the cameras, and there was some additional ones on the backside, outside, plus some upgraded software with it that makes them easier for offsite people to manage. But it would also be there's about $500 worth of extra film that we had done when the project came in that wasn't on our original list. We have the building maps done, so we'll have 3, the maps that are up on the wall that show all the classrooms. So we have 3 of those, and that'll be around $1,500 for that one. And then we have the 2 gates. We have the gates on the fencing that we put in so we could have that egress. We're going to put a cost in for that that's already paid for, but we'll see if we can get reimbursed for that. And then we'll just put in for some supplies for PPE stuff going forward. We aren't able to get right now the masks or the thermometers or some of those sorts of things, but if we could have a few, some supplies, if they've granted for those things, they might not for that, but we should have enough to get close to using most of that 7,200. So I just feel we've got to ask, and if they will allow us to use it that way, then that will make sense. But at some point in time, and so I'll put it on the May agenda because you'll have to approve that amendment, but that's what we'd be asking for. The summer school options, I did show you the modified grid, but basically, we're waiting for DPI to give us guidance about what we can do at the elementary virtually. They were supposed to start on that on Monday. They said we'd have it by the end of this week. We don't have it yet, but it just depends on what we can count and what we have to do or how we count minutes, whether that will be valuable. But if we're sort of looking at trying to do a few things, maybe twice a week for 5 weeks or 3 times a week for 4 weeks. Things like just book club, reading club, where teachers for younger kids might just read to them, read stories, have a little story hour. Some of the others may be math games or, but just 2 or 3 times a week for 45 minutes just to touch base. So obviously it wouldn't be as much time that we're either paying teachers or that the kids are online, but I don't see a lot of other kinds of things that we'll be able to do that way. I think we've got someone who's willing to do a yoga that might capture a few kids. We've got some middle school remediation that we normally do that might be almost student by student for 30-minute, just one-on-one. We have some kids that need some extra help. But the big ones would be Miss Halverson teaching a 4-week class articulated for Southwest Tech for Excel certification, and the other one for Microsoft certification. So those 2 together would be the equivalent of the computer applications course. So kids could take that then during the summer and then not take it during the fall. And that might help us if we get enough kids to do that, rather than having Ms. Halverson teaching 2 of those sections. She might only need 1, and then she can open it up and offer something else. So, and we get about a quarter of us. I sound so mercenary. I'm counting these as, how many minutes of a kid do we get? But for each one of those classes, that'd be like a quarter of a kid. So that would be helpful in terms of our count. And then, like I say, the Southwest Tech, we've got, I think it's written communication and intro to psychology and medical terminology, and was it speech, the other one? Anyway, there are 4 or 5 that they're working with us to identify the teachers, because even though it's taught by Southwest staff, in order for us to count it, those people have to have DPI K through 12 licensure. So they're teaching at Southwest Tech, but they might not have ever taught in a K-12 system. So they're working on finding the teachers who are willing to go through the paperwork to get licensed. So we may have to get them a provisional license, and it might cost us $75 per teacher to do that, but it would be well worth it to be able, if we can get that summer school enrollment to make that happen. So we've gotten most of the agreements. Now we're just trying to, pinpoint the teachers that would make the most sense. And Ashley's working on a flyer that we'll get out to the kids. But if we can get a few of the kids to do that, that would be really helpful because we've got driver's ed is going to be remotely in June through Zoom. And so that will get us one FTE. I think the elementary, the reading groups, if those are allowed, could get us one FTE. So if we can get, a half a dozen kids taking those courses, so through Southwest Tech, we're already at 5, not counting Miss Halverson. She will always be Ashley Mathias to me. So I think I'm feeling positive about the summer school numbers. If we can get a few kids in there, it's been a little bit of working around the creative events to try to make some of that happen. But man, I didn't want to walk away from that $75,000 in equalization aid without at least giving it a yeoman's chance. And I think we've got a good shot at making something happen that way. So, and again, if we end up with a lot more flexibility from DPI and teachers can do more and teachers want to, well, we'll spend more of that $15,000 that I've kind of got in that reserve bucket right now. But I think there'll be a fair number of teachers that will be ready to maybe take a break from some of that too. But we won't have the fitness program. We won't have music lessons. We won't have the summer musical. There are a fair number of those things that we already know we can't do. So there will be a savings in that summer school pot. It might not be that full 15,000, but if that makes sense to you guys, that's the direction we'd like to go.
Yeah, that seems to make sense to me.
Okay.
I'm good with that.
Good. And then we'll just bring that to the board because it'll be a little bit different in the Southwest Tech tuition and things like that. But we pay, it's what, 400, what did I say? $482 for one 3-credit course. But we get half of an FTE. That's a nice trade-off from our standpoint, even if we have to pay for the license along the way. The professional development options then. I put together, again, this had been included in the proposal that I had shared with you when we did the staffing at the last board meeting, but we really didn't talk about it. But I had said in there that might be seeking some flexibility because people were going to be needing to get some, licensing fairly quickly. So I tried to spell that out and share it in a way that it's a no-cost trade, but it's a trade-off where the district could pay for some of the coursework up front, and the teacher just wouldn't move on the pay scale until you had earned back what it is that you'd invested in their tuition. And it would only apply for those areas where we're required to get a license, because most teachers now, through our PDP or other ways, they can move on the pay scale without having to pay for credits. So it seems if we really needed people to get special ed license, or the reading teacher, or library media is another one, or eventually a reading specialist license, because you're going to be paying, what, $3,200 a year for someone to have the reading specialist license. It makes sense for those that we're required to have to try to find a way to make it possible for people to do that. Doesn't prevent someone, if someone wants to, for example, get into a master's program and move for the credits, they can still do that. But this would be a way for someone, if we'd say, boy, can we really talk you into doing this for us? It gives you some options to help people get there. Did that make sense, what I was trying to lay out there for everybody?
For me, it did.
Because it would be a no cost factor for the district. Again, you're making some payments at the front level, but again, for the one that we need right now, the special ed license, that would be out of this year's budget. And the first wave of the reading teacher hopefully would be out of this year's budget too. So it would be a jump start in that direction.
Nancy, I think that's a decent compromise between what we were doing in the past, paying for credits and trying to move to the lanes to get away from paying for specific credits. But like you said, where the district is kind of needing specific things, it makes sense to pay for them up front and yet use the lanes to recoup it.
Yeah, I think it, and I think it works well for staff then that way too, because sometimes it's really hard to do that upfront piece. It's easier to wait and get the lane changes later. And then every time you put the PDP together, you could you can spell that out based on that. So we would certainly do that in this case for the reading teacher one. So we'd have it spelled out clearly. But I think this guide gives everybody a way to sort of see how that would work. But it'd be just for very limited cases where there was a special license that you needed to get. Because a lot of licenses, for example, if we need someone to teach a science or a math class, or if we needed someone to teach in the middle school that's normally in the elementary, we could apply for a provisional license, move the teacher into that role. They could get 3 years of experience. We could provide whatever professional development we deemed was needed, and they would just be licensed in that area. It's the flexibility is there for almost all of the other licenses. They may have to take a content test, but they wouldn't have to take a class. But for the reading teacher, special ed licenses, or the library media specialist, they still have to go and be in a program and get some courses. So it's really only those 3 areas that you'd ever need to use this, because the others can be done in a different fashion.
Okay.
Okay. The federal state, the one that I shared with you was the policy statement, because again, this is coming out of the federal grant money. We have Title I grant money and the special education grant money. And so they are giving us some flexibility. For example, a special ed aide that normally would have worked for us 7.5 hours a day serving special education kids, that person might be helping out a couple hours a day with meals or doing something else. So they know that across the board, districts have had to use staff however they've needed to use them. So they told us right away to still book their salary in special ed. And this policy is the only thing that they're asking us to do to still be able to claim that whole salary under special education, which means we get the categorical aid for that salary. Now we're in a good spot because we're basically using our special ed aides for special ed work. They're online, they're taking the classes, they're contacting kids, they're tutoring kids. But as we get toward the end of May, we may pull some of them to help with food service or to help with some of the cleaning or whatnot. So it's nice to know that we wouldn't lose categorical aid if we keep them employed doing something that's not exactly a reimbursable cost historically. So this policy then that I'll bring to the board is just saying that under an extreme emergency, extraordinary circumstances, we may use people outside their category. So that's the only requirement that we have to make that happen. So that's a pretty easy policy to adopt for that reason. In terms of the others, we talked a little bit about the compensatory days, and that don't know what that's going to be. That will be Bryce and Josh's issues to sort of sort through as they get into the summer. But I just want to make sure that we're aware that that need is coming from this collection of laws that are out there. And the only other one that's kind of a policy related piece, when we come in May on the staffing piece, I talked with Eileen about the extracurricular contracts, and we'll do something. I'd still like we're ready to endorse the renewal of the contracts, but I want to be fair with all of the coaches. Because we go into next year, I think what we'll want to say is that here's an assurance of employment. We intend to hire you for those jobs, but if we aren't able to hold the season, just know we're not going to be, that this contract won't apply if the season is never able to be held. Because it was one thing this year when everybody was kind of scrambling and some of the people had already been doing some of the work, or we were partway through the seasons. I want to have some language in there that alerts the coaches. I'll do stuff all year round for their programs, but just to know if before their season starts, it's canceled, that we're not, there will be no contract for that year. So if we do that right from the beginning, and then they don't have to accept their contract if they don't like the terms of that. And then they can also know, well, gee, if I'm coaching basketball, I might be careful how many hours I put in, because it might not happen this year. So I just think it's okay not to pay for those extracurricular pieces, as long as you're upfront and honest with people about it from the beginning. So, but that's your call. If you feel differently and you would like to offer the contracts and say, we'll stand by them like we are standing by, salary contracts, you can still do that. But I did talk to Eileen, and she said it would be perfectly fine for us to, to alert the coaches, let them know that if their season, and even you could even do a proration if you wanted to say, if your season is halted, but again, define it ahead of time. How would you prorate it? Would it be based on the weeks of the season or whatever? But I just would feel better. I don't have a problem with not paying somebody, but I have a problem with not paying someone if it's out of the blue and it's a surprise. If they know about it, then I think you're in a different situation. So would you like me to pursue that language with Eileen to give you the option to not stick with contracts if there aren't seasons this year?
I would, Nancy.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll talk to her and see what's up on that one. The other piece then is the transportation piece as well. And that's a big dollar amount for this year, but even on the conference call that I was on again today, they just said, we don't know enough about that. There could be still additional insurance issues that some people, disruption of service, there may be some insurance that companies have too. And the message basically is there's no rush on this, but you would need to make a decision. Do you want to hold some money in reserve and put it in fund balance in case there's more payment? And how much of that would you want to hold in advance? But I also could go back to Eileen on that one. I haven't yet, because I don't want to pay for more legal advice at a particular point in time. But when we're ready, that would be a good place for us to go to. And maybe she'd have a recommendation about, because our contract is really clear, in terms of of what you do and don't have to pay for. So we'd have to really determine, what the value is that we are paying for beyond what you've already paid for the service. So, but if you'd like to have a legal opinion on what you should do for this year, I'd need to probably move on that, in the next, in the next short while, so that we can factor that into what it is that how much money you have available to make your decisions around. So, and Bryce, just for an example, our contract says clearly that if there are any snow days or acts of God or other extreme circumstances, that we don't pay for routes that are not delivered. So we've only paid for the routes that we have actually, that Warco actually provided for us, actually drove for us. So,
but that'll change in the future contracts.
It probably, we're in the middle of a 5-year contract. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
So 2 more years left with that language?
Yes.
Okay.
But that's also another piece too. If you wanted to make some sort of if you liked that language, maybe that would be a value that you could purchase. You could say, we'll pay so much, but we want to keep some language in our contract, for maybe up to 10 days or up to whatever that we, so you could play around with the language a little bit too, and then you could give them more money because you're getting value by being able to extend that contract language longer than, because that will be a big issue in
Right.
a year's time, but you might have some leverage this year to negotiate to keep at least a part of that language going forward. Is that making sense? The
language will be the same for a couple years, right?
Yes, right. It would be.
And how, you keep rolling that contract? When do you renegotiate it? 5 years at a time? The language?
They would be probably asking us to start talking. They like to keep a 3 to 5 year contract out there. So we're at the point where, given if this had not happened, I'm sure they would have probably approached us this year to start, or early next fall to start saying, can we get another 2-year extension?
Okay.
At least, right? So it would be time to maybe start having that conversation, but.
Okay.
But you could also do that next fall. You don't have to make the payment in, between now and May and June. It's just that you want to make sure you've got enough money next year if you decide to make the payment, that you've rolled some funds over into that for next year. So.
Right.
I can check with Eileen and just ask her to just talk it through with me a little bit, and wouldn't take a lot to get, she doesn't have to write a 5-page a brief like she did when she was trying to talk to everybody about the contract, but it might be good just to get an update. Would that make sense?
Yeah, I think that would make sense.
Okay.
I mean, it's just an easy update, I think.
Okay. And I had shared with you guys earlier some of the revenue projections and the expenditure kinds of pieces. And we did have a really nice budget 2.5 months ago that balanced itself very nicely. And I haven't reworked all of the details. There've just been so many unanswered questions, but I'm feeling a little bit better about where we may end up. Because even if we do go with the 0 projection, like I had talked about at one point in time, at least we wouldn't necessarily have the reduction in state aid to go along with it, or at least not the full 75,000. So if we can recoup half of that, that makes it far less punishing in terms of the revenue cap or the state aid. We also have a new student that's going to be coming in as an early childhood student that's coming from birth to 3. And I have not calculated what that transfer of service cost is going to be because we just haven't been able to have that IEP meeting yet and get the necessary evaluation. But I'm guessing we're going to be talking speech language, OTPT, if not in the full early childhood program. So there certainly will be, and that total cost can be recovered as a revenue cap. So that should be an enhancement of the revenue cap that would help us offset some of the loss of that $179, per kid. So that I hadn't put in the forms before. And with the hold harmless, even if we can't quite get the full 4 for the revenue cap, all we need is, if we get 5, then we keep 2 of the 4 students for summer school for the rollover. If we get 7 kids in summer school, we get 3 of the 4, and then we are right at the same projected number as we were last year. Our 3-year rolling average stays the same at 306. So I think we're in better shape to look at maybe not even having the hold harmless come into play, and that's better because the first year doesn't hurt you. So next year the revenue cap will be okay, but it's the second and the third year of the 3-year rolling average, it starts going down. So if we can preserve the summer school numbers so that we only go down 1 or 2, and we are able to get those back the next year, then you won't have much of a blip in that 3-year rolling average. So that part of next year is looking good. looking better. I won't say it's looking good, but it's looking better. My concern is things like the $25,000, $20,000 that we get for admissions for the extracurricular kind of programs. Now, granted, there'll be a savings, and we wouldn't be paying then, officials. But if we're playing the games with the officials, but we're not playing them for audiences, that we wouldn't be having admissions for something that we'd still be having the expenses for. I don't know how likely that is. So do you or don't you subtract those? And even that's just one of those examples for some of the local costs that might be interesting. Transportation, we would be back in the same situation again. I think our best bet is for the expenditures, whether it's utilities or transportation, just to book those as they would normally be with the normal anticipated increases. If there's savings at the end of the year, there's savings at the end of the year, but we'll sort of plan on that. But it's the revenue side that have been on the local revenues that I've just not known what to do with those. So, because if I were a betting person, football is about half. Football and volleyball cover about half of that 20,000. Basketball about the other half. So it'll just be an unknown, and I could come up with 6 different revenue scenarios, all a little bit different. But again, I think for the most part, we're probably the biggest one will be the change in the revenue cap, and we've sort of anticipated what that number would be if we can moderate the equalization aid. Then the others, it's all kind of a crapshoot at this point, what we will and won't get in, or what we will or won't expend. But I'd like to think that if we don't have the revenue on one side, we're not going to have the expense on the other side. So they'd be offsetting. So if I book the extracurricular program, just as though we're going to have all of it, then book the admissions, then if we don't have one, hopefully we won't have the other. So that's how I'll look at those as we go forward. I did want to point out on the expenditure side, the insurance for next year, we didn't have the best rating at the end of the year for the insurance co-op. I think it was like 110%. So it would have been a double digit had we not had someone in our corner negotiating for us. Just on our usage, the projection was a double digit increase for next year, 12% or something like that. But M3 worked hard on the part of the consortium. They wanted to go with the 6%, which was what the not to exceed 6% agreement that we had, and they were able to get that down to 5%, even though, like I say, that had we not had that agreement, it would have been at 12%. So that's good. And the original budget, I had booked it at 6%, so I'll go back in and I'll change that to the 5%. But they also have added another category that we could add, and that's the 3,000 and 6,000 upfront deductible, and it is a lesser rate. But when I ran the numbers, it doesn't help us. We don't save enough on the premium to offset, the increase for the staff to go from the, So if we were going to just hold them harmless, we wouldn't save any money. So the only way that would make sense is if you indeed wanted to pass more of the costs on to the staff. And at this point, I wouldn't recommend that in this environment. My intent then would be just to roll us over into the same plan that we currently have and move forward with that. And Bree, our consultant, said to it, it's hard to get the savings. Once you're already at a $2,000 to $4,000, it's hard to get enough savings to really, offset that. And like I say, I don't think now is the time to be adding health costs to anybody else. So just so you know, that's what I will be doing.
And
Yeah.
what do you do? How much do you fund of the HRA into the HRA?
We do it a little bit different. We have it's 1,500 of the 4,000 and 750 of the 2,000, but we do 500 up front and then the last 250 on a single.
Okay.
We do 1,000 up front and then 250 or 500 on the
At
end
the end.
for the family. So we split it. So,
Then there's no carryover from year to year. I mean, if somebody
No.
doesn't use any of it, it's just
No.
you pay as
Yeah.
claims come in. Okay.
right, it's not an etch, it's just, so that's why when we're looking at that, and we pair that back every year in terms of what our percent is that we put in the budget for that. And we're still on this is our third full year. And I think we could pare that back some next year and still be okay. This is a little unusual year though, because people just haven't been able to get to the doctor much here in this last stretch. So I'm not expecting to see big bills in May and June because people just haven't been going to the doctor. Even those pregnant ladies are saying, just stay home, we'll see you in 2 months. And they've been sort of keeping everybody away. So, but that will be helpful as we kind of move forward. So.
Okay. Thanks.
So that's kind of, and like I say, next year's still a little bit wishy, but I was focusing much more in trying to get a handle because there are pockets of unspent stuff out there that I just wanted to make sure we had some good options for spending money this year that we didn't have to have too much carryover. Because again, given the circumstances, I think Fund 46 is still a good option for you. Some targeted movement of funds into the fund balance, but just to have money to go in the fund balance for that to grow, I don't think is necessarily the best move locally, because it would just impact state your property taxes locally more next year with an even greater reduction in state aid. But I think politically it's also something both state and federal governments are looking at school fund balances. And if across the state, this has just ended up with school districts having a bigger, what's perceived as a savings account, which we know it's not. That's not always the strategic choices to move it in to spend it next year, yes. But when you've got a good fund balance like you do, I don't think you want to pad it just for the sake of padding it when you've got reasons to spend the money otherwise. And that's a decision that we'll make in June, and there may even we may have a second meeting in June to finalize some of that, because it might come down to that a little bit. But you'll have a chance to obviously take another look in about 6 weeks' time at that too. So there's an awful lot of stuff there, guys. What can I do how can I answer questions?
I really don't have any questions, Nancy, other than, obviously we gotta get your side of it figured out, but it's still a revolving door pretty much every day on a lot of this stuff. So
Yeah. In buildings and grounds, we'll have a little more input on the specific nature of some of those. You are in agreement that at least that targeted amount makes sense to expend. Then buildings and grounds can give a little more detail to that. Here it is. Is there anything on that list? I think the huddle and eye in the sky is open, but is there anything else on any of those that you'd have questions about?
Are you going to get any rebate or anybody help you with, is there a focus on energy money for LED lighting?
Yes.
So that's in the work.
Yeah, so what's in the budget on that list is the full payment, but we will get I think it's what was it, $1, $1.50 or something like that, and we're buying, 9,000 or something like that for that amount. So yeah, there's a couple $1,000s that's coming back, but I'm not quite sure. Sometimes that takes a while. So if we don't get that bill processed until June, that'll probably be a revenue in July is my guess. So I booked the full amount because we won't probably get that reimbursement back. So are you okay with me presenting these sort of as they are, at least buildings and grounds will have one more look at them next week, and then I can, I'll plan on putting those on the docket for approval on the 13th so that we can move ahead and at least get that close to $100,000 finalized.
I am.
I'm fine with that. As
Yep,
far
it
as the piece,
looks like we had things.
oh, go ahead.
I'm
Go
sorry,
ahead.
Mike?
Go ahead, Patton.
You can go, Mike.
No, I was just going to agree that we can look at it at buildings and grounds, and you answered most of our questions, Nancy, so there aren't a whole lot left. We have building and grounds next Wednesday at 5:30, is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And that will be primarily sort of the bleacher options. We've got a pest control company change. We'd like to see updates on some of the projects that we're working on. So.
Okay.
So
I was just gonna hit on that essential staff for you. I don't know. I don't have a problem talking about it with you here, and I just wondered, I mean, what other options are there that we wouldn't be pushing it out over the 5 years, like Mike was talking about, that it's also not going to hurt you, or it's a way. What other options do we have, really? I mean, I don't have a problem. The amount that you're coming up with, I think, is more than fair. I mean, you're putting in more time than what you're actually asking for to get paid. It's just, what options are there to pay you where it doesn't hurt you, and it's something that we can actually do.
well, it's hard to consider any kind of payment as being pain to me, so that you don't have to worry about that one. And I fully understand that we any post-employment benefits. So to add one back in again, I understand your reluctance to do that. So beyond that, like I say, the computer is real. It just, that one would be really nice just because it's comfortable. I'd like Bryce to get, his own going forward. But my guess is that if I can stay linked up with the email stuff and whatnot, that I'm hoping that Bryce and Linda might appreciate having me linked in fairly closely, at least for a little while. This transition isn't going as we planned, is it, Bryce? So that part of it, that piece is a good piece. And like I said, I just was trying to float out something that might not be quite as big a piece for you guys at this point in time, but I'm not quite sure, if you want to make sure it's done this month, I'm not sure outside of just, an adjustment to the contract for salary, if there's anything else that I can think of at this point that would sort of make sense.
But if you did that, if you got a lump sum, you still put money in a 403B? It wouldn't
Yes,
be
right.
taxable now, but when you take it out, it's taxable.
Right.
Pay for that benefit.
Right.
Whereas the other way, if they continue the benefit, you wouldn't have the tax amount for the benefit, basically.
Yeah. Right. But that, like I say, that's, I'm a big girl. I can put the money away and pay for my own dental insurance as I go forward too. So that's
Nancy, the computer may cost you a lot more than it cost us.
I can shut it off.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
Well, and like I say, I honestly mean that. I mean, I took the job to take the job. So it's never been about the hours, but this has been a little bit exceptional this last stretch. So it certainly has not been the part-time gig that that it had.
That would be, yep.
Some consideration is certainly appreciated, but it you do the job when it's yours to do. So I'm comfortable with that too.
Like Todd said, I'm more than comfortable with the amount you're asking for, Nancy. I have no issue with that, so.
This is kind of like paying ahead on services for next year as well.
I'm sorry, Mike.
I said we're kind of paying ahead for services for next year as well.
Yeah, Bryce is going to be just fine. I toyed with that idea and say, well, okay, well, we won't count it for this year. We'll just, consider it prepayment for any time I spend next year. I said, no, that's really too dangerous. I don't want to do that.
Yeah, speed dial on your computer.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
Now that we've figured out how well these Zoom meetings go, I mean, we can have you involved in a lot.
Right.
Oh, it's scary how quickly we've made that adjustment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Would you like me then to bring a contract adjustment then to the board?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And for the figure that would include the dental insurance and what I had put in as additional salary, those two numbers combined?
Yep.
Okay.
Was there anything else? That was pretty much the end of your list, right?
Yep.
Okay.
So in terms of recommendations for the board, on the May agenda, we'll have the end of the year expenditures that
End of year.
Finance and Buildings and Grounds then can endorse as they please. I'll have the contract adjustments for the essential employees. I'll have the safety grant, hopefully, ready for an approval. We'll revamp the summer school. We'll approve the flexibility in the PDP process for the professional development. We'll have, I guess that's it. Sounds like,
Sounds like enough.
yes.
Okay, I'm good with that. Did anybody else have anything else they wanted to cover?
Oh, and the policy, the DPI policy. We'll add that on there too, so. I still plan, Bryce, on having the policy book done. We haven't made a lot of progress, but we're going to get there.
So nothing. I assume nothing else. Then I'm not hearing anything else. So I guess we can. I would.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All right.
I'll second.
Sounds good. We are adjourned at 6:52.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks a lot, folks.
Everybody, see you later.
See you later. It's Josh's hands. It's the quietest I've had Josh in a long time.
Hey, I do want to know from Josh, though. Did you put a shirt and tie on just for tonight? You got shorts on, don't you?
I'm not wearing any pants at all right now.
That's what I figured. I don't even want to know anymore.
He's in a shirt and tie every day.
Yeah.
I'm in my
I see
Green
he hasn't
Bay
shaved
shirt,
in a
I'm
while,
my
though.
Minnesota shirt.
Looks like he's got the winter gruff going on there. So
I do. I don't shave as often as I used to.
all right, you guys have a good night.
Thanks a lot. We'll see you later.
Yep.
Bye, Josh. We'll talk in the morning, okay?
Sounds great.
All righty.